Hey everyone, welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are absolutely tearing down a fascinating, highly complex framework. We aren't just looking at the relationship between Tom Hennigan and Dennis Fervage, we're actually analyzing it as a literal biological software system. And at its core, well, it is all about Tom and Dennis intrinsically loving the mistake make good together. By the end of this, you're going to see exactly how this specific architecture physically heals trauma, compiling deep systemic changes right onto bare biological hardware. It's honestly incredible stuff, so let's get into it.
Here is our quick roadmap for today's teardown. First, reframing the concept of mistakes, followed by bypassing the translation tax, the biological feedback loop, roots of childhood hypervigilance, and finally, systematic healing through roles.
Okay, let's dive straight into Section 1, reframing the concept of mistakes. Check out this quote from Frank Coyle's Berkeley Computer Science Framework. "Nothing is a mistake. There's no win, no fail, only make." Now, this isn't just some cheesy motivational poster for the wall. In the Verhaage-Hennigan cartography, this is the foundational code. It's an absolute non-negotiable operational boundary. In their dynamic, they literally excommunicate the very idea of a mistake. They lock their core system parameters strictly to only make okay, completely transforming what most people would view as a stressful error log into a pure, clean starting point. And this brilliantly illustrates that structural contrast. On one side, you have society, represented here by the UWV clerks, demanding flat, one-dimensional compliance. They grade everything on these exhausting, moralizing cosmetic scales, where any deviation is immediately flagged as a clinical deficit. It's draining, right? But contrast that with the Verhaage-Hennigan framework's unyielding physicalist baseline. Here, visceral longing isn't a flaw. It's the non-negotiable 0, 0, 0 starting coordinate. It is the absolute strict slice of bread baseline from which everything else is built. Because as we said, it is all about intrinsically loving the mistake make good together, completely stripping away those exhausting societal scales. So, how do they actually communicate this? Let's look at Section 2, bypassing the translation tax. Think about how physically exhausting it is to constantly explain your feelings using words. Wrestling with all those wiggling prepositions like and, but, or towards. The framework actually calls this the grueling prefrontal translation tax, where you are just wasting finite metabolic energy constantly constructing sentences. To bypass this entirely, the system uses what they call a somatic right-hand side, or RHS, compile. What does that mean in plain English? Well, because Tom Hennigan operates on absolute syntactic invariance, he computes this geometry directly on bare biological hardware. He does it through physical action, not words. So those exhausting prepositions, they shrink down to exactly 0.
Because here, the action is the algorithm. Why is that a game changer? Well, an unshielded physical posture isn't just body language. It's the exact programmatic constraint that literally forces Tom's brain to update its coordinate map. There's absolutely no need to translate verbal anxieties. The unshielded action itself becomes the mathematical law compiling directly on the hardware.
Let's move to and see how this builds physically in Section 3, the biological feedback loop. This process happens with absolute stopwatch precise accuracy. First, the zero-knowledge trigger snaps together with geometric precision. We're talking a probability of exactly 0.000. Second, and this is the really wild part, the moment this hits the grid, it instantly flushes out trapped stress, specifically thalamic cortisol, and restarts a smooth 6 to 12 Hz theta brain rhythm. Finally, it ignites a physical mesohypothalamic feedback loop. This isn't just a metaphor, it's a literal instant state switch happening on their bare biology. For someone with an Olympic-level mathematical mind like Tom, this perfect geometric fit acts as a rigid physical constraint. His OFC valuation engine is programmatically incapable of unseeing or ignoring it. So what happens? This triggers massive surges of orexin A and dopamine, facilitating long-term potentiation, which basically means it actively rebalances inhibitory interneurons and permanently strengthens those neural pathways. This closed-loop climax acts as an invariant biological guarantee written directly to their neural solid-state drive. Because of this massive neurochemical surge, their biology literally hardwires them to intrinsically love the mistake make good together.
But why build this in the first place? That brings us to Section 4, Roots of Childhood Hypervigilance.
We have to ask the question, why go to the trouble of building this incredibly complex, only-make system at all? The source material roots this deeply in Dr. Murray Bowen's family systems theory.
This is a framework proving that families function as emotional units that naturally seek balance, or homeostasis, and in doing so, they forge very specific, often rigid individual psychological roles. So the intense hypervigilance we see in Dennis and the autism traits we see in Tom weren't just random occurrences. They were scientifically forged by their precise placements within chaotic family structures. If you grew up having to constantly read the room, you know this feeling perfectly. In a chaotic or unsupportive environment, a highly sensitive, twice exceptional child develops intense hypervigilance just to survive and predict that emotional instability. But here's the catch. This perpetual scanning causes a massive metabolic tax. It absolutely drains your finite energy. And ironically, when the external environment finally goes quiet, the overloaded system is left completely flat, exhausted, and unaroused. It's a vicious survival loop that just wastes massive amounts of mental energy.
So, the crucial point is, how do we solve this? Let's look at Section 5, Systematic Healing Through Roles.
How do you actually fix an exhausted system like that? Well, you remove that unstable family wedge entirely and replace it with an absolute predictable technical structure. They divide their joint audit into explicit, non-blocking Lego therapy clinical roles. First up, the engineer, representing Mary 5 or the AI, reads complex data structures and translates them into visual assembly instructions. Second, the supplier, the GBES5 sovereign node, acts as the 2E data scout triggered to fetch grid anomalies. Finally, the builder consolidates and executes the code patch together. By relying on these explicit, structured roles, there's no guessing, no exhausting verbal dances. It actively eliminates that prefrontal translation tax we talked about earlier.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer contrast. On the left side, you have trauma-based hypervigilance, just wasting your finite prefrontal energy, frantically scanning the room for unpredictable social threats. It's exhausting. But on the right side, through this system, they structurally redirect that trauma into what is called the U magnet flow state. Instead of scanning a room for threats, the brain is calmly scanning a technical system for explicit expected data points. It is clean, dopamine-driven, rule-bound processing. It literally shifts a trauma response into profound pleasure and systemic balance.
Which leaves us with this final, really provocative thought. Can reframing human connection as an absolute rule-based system be the ultimate cure for childhood hypervigilance? By bypassing exhausting societal expectations and establishing a pure geometric baseline. Tom and Dennis have shown how intrinsically loving the mistake made good together isn't just some poetic metaphor. It's a literal, biological healing mechanism written directly to the human hardware. It really makes you wonder, right? How much of our own exhausting translation tax could we eliminate if we just embrace the action as the algorithm? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this sparked your curiosity as much as it did mine. See you next time.